Good afternoon. My name is Clendenin. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the judges. Thank you guys for taking the time out of your weeks to read out these papers and then to show up here and be willing to give feedback on our theses. Second, I would like to thank Shay Gilliam for mentoring me through this process and providing the insight needed to complete this assignment. My thesis statement is the federal government has both a legal and moral obligation to provide for the needs of veterans suffering from post-combat injuries. Just to give some background for why I chose this thesis, I'm currently in the process of joining the Marine Corps. And through that process, I have had conversations with both active duty military members and veterans. And a topic that often comes up in these conversations is the failings of the VA and how the VA just isn't doing as good a job as it could be doing. So I decided to use this opportunity through senior thesis to research the VA and just get to know a little bit more about how it works and its failings before I need to rely on it. Just for reference, here are some definitions I will be using. VA refers to the Federal Department of Veteran Affairs, which is responsible for benefits, healthcare, and cemetery services for veterans post-combat. PTSD refers to post-traumatic stress disorder, which is defined as a condition of persistent mental and emotional stress occurring as a result of injury or severe psychological shock, typically involving constant vivid recall of the experience with dull responses to others in the outside world. DOGE refers to the Department of Government Efficiency, which was created by President Trump at the beginning of his term with the goal of cutting government costs. According to USDebtClock.org, so far, DOGE has reclaimed around $370 billion from government agencies who are squandering it. The Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines moral as of or relating to principles of right and wrong in behavior. A recent study showed that there were over 35,000 homeless veterans in America today. One of the contributing factors to veteran homelessness is mental health issues stemming from combat. According to Psychology Today, veterans who suffer from PTSD or other mental illnesses are more at risk of homelessness. The VA does have a housing service for veterans post-combat. However, 40% of veterans who utilize that service said they still experience homelessness after the fact. If a part of veteran homelessness stems from post-combat issues, then it should be the responsibility of the federal government to take care of those issues. If an employee is injured on a job, it is the duty of the employer to make sure the injury is taken care of. So why should that change when talking about the federal government? It shouldn't. The federal government deals with veteran welfare through the VA. However, not everyone is allowed into the VA health system. On the website for the Department of Justice, there is a page on eligibility for the VA. And the intro to the page says this, quote, veterans must meet both basic and more specific criteria. Generally, a veteran has to meet 3 basic criteria to be eligible for VA healthcare. A veteran must, 1, meet the statutory definition of a veteran, meaning an individual who served in the active military, naval, or air service, and who was discharged or released under conditions other than dishonorable. 2, meet the statutory definition of active duty, meaning full-time duty in the armed forces other than active duty for training. And 3, have served a minimum period of 24 months of continuous active duty. Some veterans may meet the eligibility requirements listed above, but due to the discretionary nature of the VA health system funding, may not be allowed to enroll in the system, end quote. Discretionary is defined as left to individual choice or judgment. So the last sentence of this intro to the page on eligibility gives the VA power to turn away any veteran for any reason. By adding that last line, the VA gives itself an extremely high amount of control over who is allowed to enroll in the VA health system. This is morally wrong. By adding this sentence, the VA allows itself to say no to anyone for any reason. To truly understand the scope of the issue, we need to take a look into what's going on inside the VA. As I mentioned earlier, DOGE has been going into government agencies and doing inspections of their personnel and resources to make sure there's no waste. After the inspection of the VA, the Chief of Staff, Christopher Cyreek, released this memo. Quote, VA, in partnership with our DOGE leads, will move out aggressively while taking a pragmatic and disciplined approach to identify and eliminate waste, reduce management and bureaucracy, reduce footprint, and increase the workforce efficiency. Along with this, the VA has slated 83,000 employees to be fired nationwide. At first, this sounds like it would lower the amount of veterans that can be treated. However, the whole goal of this is to increase the workforce efficiency, as Ivy says. Along with getting rid of the employees, another upside of that is it will free up a lot of funding previously locked into employee salaries. According to govsalaries.org, the average VA employee makes around $105,000 per year. So with those 83,000 employees being fired, that is just over $8.7 billion that will be freed up in money that can be repurposed towards veteran treatment. In writing my thesis, I was referred to a VA chaplain who I was told could help with any questions I had and would just be a good resource to use. So I set up a meeting, and the hour before we were supposed to call, I texted her to confirm that she was good to do it. She said she was. However, when the time of the meeting rolled around, I called her, she didn't answer. And about 15 minutes after the fact, I sent her a text and I asked if she was still willing to meet with me for my thesis. And it took her a full week to respond. And her response was that she had a 25-minute window right then where I could call. I was in school and wasn't able to make that appointment. So I let her know, and I asked if we could reschedule for another time. She has still not gotten back to me, and that was early March. A VA chaplain couldn't make time for a 15-minute phone call that was planned and then confirmed the hour before. This is just further evidence that the VA is not doing as good a job as it could be doing. The solution I propose to this issue is to provide the VA with more funding. However, with a national debt of just over $36 trillion, providing more money to the VA would just make that debt worse. Right now, the dollar is at risk of losing its status as the global reserve currency. If that happens, then the value of the dollar will significantly decrease. We need to keep our debt under control so the dollar keeps its value. But the VA needs more funding in order to provide resources to veterans. So the solution I would propose would be to repurpose some of the $370 billion that DOJ has reclaimed towards the VA treatment. Along with the money, there also needs to be accountability. Because without accountability for the money they are receiving, it will all just be squandered again. The VA needs to put the money specifically into what is lacking in treatment for veterans. In addition to more funding, the VA needs to abolish all the legal loopholes that allow them to pick and choose which veterans they help. Contentions. While it may be true that the VA could benefit from more funding, it already serves over 8 million veterans per year. That doesn't even take into account the amount of other programs that other veterans participate in, instead of the VA. With serving over 8 million veterans, does the government really need to provide more to the VA? All that is true, yes. However, with only 60% of veterans receiving care, it does not seem moral to leave the others out to dry. While it may be true that not all veterans seek treatment, the difference between those who seek treatment and those who receive it is about 5 to 7%. That 5 to 7%, with having just over 16 million veterans in the US, comes up to just about 1 million people. 1 million veterans who cannot receive the care they need. The government has a moral obligation to provide care to all veterans who have given their lives in service to this country. Another valid counter-argument is that not all 16 plus million veterans seek help. There are a myriad of reasons that a veteran might not receive care. Firstly, some veterans might not know they need help. If the issues they have are not serious enough, they might think they don't need help. Secondly, there's a pride issue. Some veterans don't want to seek care because they think it makes them look weak. Thirdly, not all veterans need treatment. Some veterans are lucky and don't receive lasting trauma from the battlefield or their time in service. Lastly, there's an accessibility issue. Not all veterans who seek treatment are able to receive it. The military has a saying, "No man left behind." Why should that change when seeking help for trauma received in the battlefield? This issue is especially important due to the fact that these veterans are people who are giving their lives in service of our country. And in return, what are we giving them? A lifetime of misery and struggling alone to reacclimate to civilian life? These men and women should be honored and cared for by the nation they gave their lives in service to. In conclusion, the VA is failing to provide for all the veterans who seek help, and they have legal loopholes to get them out of treating certain veterans. This all needs to change. The VA needs to repurpose its funds and provide more resources and better care for veterans. As a nation, We need to support those who have given their lives in service of our country. It is a sacrifice that many of us couldn't imagine. We as a nation need to honor them and help provide them the resources they need to adapt back to civilian life. Therefore, I stand resolved that the federal government has both a legal and moral obligation to provide for the needs of veterans suffering from post-combat injuries. Thank you.
Isaiah, I just want to say, just first off, the first question I had when I read your paper was, why are you writing about the VA? And you answered at the very beginning,
Cool.
So I just want to say, I appreciate you accepting that high calling, and thank you for just supporting our country, but also the people who defend our country as well. Your thesis statement of that the government has a responsibility morally and legally to care for veterans, could not agree more. But my question I kind of want to come back to is that obviously the VA is a very government-based agency.
Yes.
And of course, some of the proposals that you've given are government-focused. But what is maybe like a practical reform? Like if President Trump calls Isaiah and goes, hey, you're now the head of the VA. What is step one? What is a practical reform you'd like to see in the VA right now?
I would say that I think that the biggest issue I come across is that 5 to 7% difference between those who seek treatment and those who actually receive it.
Sure.
So that would be I don't know what the inner workings of the VA look like monetarily and just personnel-wise, but I would do my best to just be able to just take in those extra million veterans who can't receive the treatment they need and just make sure that as a whole these veterans are taken care of, because these are the people who keep our country safe, and we're stabbing them in the back by not giving them the treatment they need.
Sure.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So follow-up question to that is, I know in your paper you talked about one of the ways that we as civilians can support the VA is through political advocacy, right? Like not being silent, and I think either it came to my mind or you wrote about, we do the 4th of July, we do Veterans Day, we do Memorial Day, where we almost have these kind of like patriotic highs, if you will. We have it's on the forefront of our minds, we need to support this, and then that kind of goes away. And hey, we need to sustain that level of support. But could you think of maybe another example, like let's say somebody doesn't feel comfortable in the political sphere or don't have those avenues? What are some ways that maybe like I in my everyday life can support the VA or support post-combat veterans, fill in that blank however you feel necessary? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
So something my family used to do the past few years is we made these like homeless bags. And there were bags with food and water and very practical things for homeless people in need. So when we pull up to a stoplight and we see a homeless person sitting there who needs help, we would hand them the bag, right? So there's the physical aspect I think is a really important part of it. So maybe that doesn't look like handing people food, but there is a physical aspect to monetarily supporting veterans, along with maybe it is handing them a bag full of food and water. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great job. I really like your heart for veterans and your heart for the country. And it's really touching that you want to support them and that you want to make a sacrifice as well for our country. I like how you wanted to use some Doge funds on that. Thought that was a good idea. And that you mentioned in your paper to have accountability to what the funds are being used for. I especially like that part. You mentioned a couple times in there how one of the barriers to veterans getting care is their pride.
Yes, that was, I just mentioned that one time in there.
Yeah, I was wondering how do you think we could, help them with that problem?
Ooh, that's a good question. So in my research, the pride issue was definitely there. It wasn't as prevalent as some of the other issues, but I feel like finding a way to portray getting help as less of a weakness and more of a must to reacclimate back to civilian life would be important, because oftentimes, you don't want to do things if you think it makes you look weak. So if you can find a way to portray the fact that it's not in fact a weakness, but in fact just a necessary part of life to reacclimate back to civilian life, I think that would help drastically. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what all of them said, especially about the
wanting to serve your country and just the heart for it. I definitely really appreciate it. I really liked reading your paper. The first question I had was the first that you had too, is like practically what do you think you could do? And I've been thinking about that actually. Sometimes things need to get messy before they get better. And I just wondered, did you think through like any major overhauls? I mean, or any historical reaffirmations into society that other nations have done? I know you're kind of passionate about that, so who knows what kind of rabbit holes you fell down. But did you think about that? Any other ways that you could just it could be completely revamped so that it was just better?
So like how like revamped like coming back into civilian life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, something that I learned recently was that PTSD began to kind of take like a more active role in the world. It's more recent, and one of like the issues behind that was like one of the possible reasons behind that is that before World War II, if you were deployed to the Middle East, before you come back home, you'd spend 3 or 4 weeks on a boat, kind of talking with your other soldiers and your fellow military members, and you kind of talk through everything that kind of happened. So once we got to the point where you're in combat Wednesday, you're flying home Thursday, you're back into civilian life Friday. A lot of those issues just kind of get pushed down under. So finding a way to like support groups or something like that, where those issues are just brought to light early on and just attacked before they have a chance to fester and become bigger issues. Is that your question?
Yeah, like a discharge
So like,
protocol
yeah.
kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I wondered about that too, if it had changed over time with things being faster and everything.
More efficient.
Right. I thought you were the one that were telling me about the samurais or other fighters that like really just got farmland and then they were never expected to go back into civilian life. We were talking about that one day, I don't know who brought it up, but it just made me think about your paper a lot. I wondered, so you were saying, what was your 3 to 5% situation?
Oh,
so like
5 to 7%.
5 to 7%, yeah, of people that try to seek it
So,
and don't get it.
Yes, who seek care and are unable to receive it.
Okay.
So the 5% is like 840,000. The 6% is 960,000. The 7% is 1,120,000.
Okay, of people that try to get in, and then that discernment clause.
Or something else prevents them from getting it.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really sad. And would you say also that the government has a moral obligation to take care of them indefinitely? So even if they were just in one battle, we'll say, or even if they weren't and they were just in the service. Like my dad was in the service during Vietnam, but he never saw battle. So I just wondered like how you think maybe that should be divided out. Like, do you get more service or more services if you were in battle longer, or is it just one thing and then you're indefinitely taking care of that?
So my thesis statement is that the federal government has both a legal and moral obligation to provide for the needs of veterans suffering from post-combat injuries. And it's a really important distinction to make that we're talking specifically about injuries sustained during combat and not everything, because then you could say, you serve for your 4 years and then 20 years later you break a leg. It shouldn't be the VA's responsibility to do that. It should be, I'm focusing specifically on injuries sustained during your time of service.
Cool. All right, so being a VA or just being a vet doesn't give you automatic access to everything.
Yes, and yeah.
Cool. Okay, thanks for clarifying that for me. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Isaiah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.